photographer kept in the fridge. That's my
Okay.
very favorite film. But it is a, a product.
Okay. One of the things that I just got was that fluorography film. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. It's the X-ray film that's used, 35 millimeter double perforated X-ray film. You can get it as washi F. I just got a bunch of that.
What makes you want to be a fluorographer?
It's the curious in me. One of the things,
it's cheap.
It's cheap. It was cheap. It's 200 feet for $50, 200 feet for $45. But I shoot a lot of Pinhole, and Pinhole is an otherworldly picture by nature, right? By the very look of it, it's an otherworldly view of the world. And this, I always think, adds to it. Expired film adds to it. Ethan, what film what off-label film is film that you find most compelling?
Paper, photographic paper.
Okay.
I grew up in New York. B&H and Adorama were right there. In fact, my stepmom used to work across the street from Adorama, so like we could get cinema films or really any. I used to buy rolls of 100 feet of T-Max and Tri-X for $19 to $21. Like that has always been available. What I wish was available is high-speed photographic paper for photo booths, which I can't get my hands on. But shooting paper as film is what I'm into these days.
Okay, yeah. That's
Can we make high speed paper? What are the ingredients?
It's kind of like a time and crystal growth issue, but no, we cannot. Not without
Galaxy Direct Pause.
Yeah,
that was the last.
Yeah,
that was the last one they did. That was
and
it wasn't direct positive. It was a negative paper.
Yeah, but it was and that's what, 7 or 8 years ago. That had its run through. Joe, what do you shoot? What do you like shooting that is off label?
I'm kind of like with Ethan. I like paper. I mean, I've been shooting paper negatives for several decades, since the mid '90s, maybe. And I like Arista Grade 2 RC paper.
Oh, okay.
Fixed grade contrast, resin coated.
Yeah. My first darkroom experience was making a what do you call it? An oatmeal box Pinhole, and we shot paper. We cut round negatives and shot paper, and then contact printed it. That was my first darkroom experience.
Yeah.
So
I like paper.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been shooting a lot of Eastman 5222. I think that's good. I had a bulk roll of Ilford, and I can't tell whether it was P3 or P4, but it's a surveillance film. And it was 400 speed surveillance film that was grainy as hell. But I really loved the look of that. I talked about the X-ray film that you can get. It's Kodak fluorography or something like that. I haven't shot any of that yet. But I love, the movie, the cinema film. I'm just all over that type of thing. Now, I also like Tri-X and ultrafine. Back when ultrafine extreme was available, I shot a ton of that in 120. And that's the one thing that I don't like, is that I can't go out and get a bulk roll of 120. I wish I could. Oh, I wish
you
I
can.
could.
It's called 70 millimeter.
Yeah, but then you got to cut it. You got to You know, you got to run through a slicer, and it's got to be, and then you get sprockets on one side, or you get partial sprockets on both sides. Not necessarily what I'm looking for. So, what do you guys say we start homemade camera?
Let's do it. I think this is the right overlay.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
Okay. Hey, welcome. We've got a special guest today, your friend and mine, Joe Van Cleave.
Hey, Joe.
You can find Joe on his YouTube channel by searching Joe Van Cleave. If you are into cameras, typewriters, stationery, astronomy, trips around Albuquerque, Joe is your guy. I think a lot of the listeners to this podcast probably have seen a little bit of Joe's videos, right? If they've been following anything that I do, Joe and I usually work together every Tuesday if we can, playing with some stuff. But we'll do like a quick intro, who Joe is and how he got into photography, that sort of thing, and then see what he is up to. That work for you guys?
Absolutely.
All right, Joe.
Yes.
Who are you? Where are you from?
Well, I'm an Albuquerque native. My great-grandfather came to Albuquerque in 1903 on a covered wagon and ranched what is now part of the city. My dad was a World War II vet, and afterwards he spent his career in the nuclear weapons field out at Kirtland Air Force Base.
Joe's pointing that way,
yes,
which is
southeast,
where they fly the nukes.
Jacksonville?
No,
he's pointing towards Jacksonville. So
no, he's pointing about 10 blocks away to the nuclear Air Force Base.
So when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s in Albuquerque, every kid on the school ground knew that there was a secret underground base with nuclear weapons because their dads worked there and they would talk about it. But that was kind of my background, right? Growing up there. I went in the Navy in the late 70s, learned some electronics, video technology, and then spent about a decade working as a consumer electronics technician in Albuquerque and also dabbling in photography. Back then in the early 90s, I got married. We got a house, and I had room to build a darkroom. And that's kind of what changed my whole photography. Being able to walk out to a darkroom at any time, being able to load up a camera with paper or film, being able to process it whenever I want to, and that led down the road to being able to make cameras. That's the kind of the secret. My story was having a darkroom. I spent a lot of time building pinhole cameras in the late 90s up through the aughts, and I was heavily involved in the F295 pinhole discussion forum that was happening around mid to late aughts. Tom Persinger out of Pittsburgh ran that website, that blog. It's technically still online, but nobody's on it anymore. So I posted a lot of camera making projects on that discussion forum, and then sometime in the mid-teens, I started a YouTube channel and initially showing some of my homemade cameras. So my earliest videos were really about some of the cameras I made. And that's how I started.
Hey, can I ask what you do for work, Joe?
Yeah, so I jokingly tell people that I interface between software systems that aren't designed to talk to each other. And that's totally not really what I do, but I work in the semiconductor manufacturing arena. I work in a chip fab, and I maintain equipment that makes the semiconductors.
So what I would add here is this is an interesting thing about Joe that you would never know from his YouTube channel. Joe builds like some real low tech and beautifully simple stuff, but Joe fixes the machines that make your computer processor all day.
So you come to work with a big hammer?
No.
No.
You have to have a very delicate hammer.
Joe works in a bunny suit.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So I want to ask you about you started building cameras. Was that after the darkroom came along?
It was, a couple years after.
Okay.
Because I initially started, before we got married, I had a 2-bedroom apartment, and my spare bedroom was a darkroom I made. And I had literally an old table stuck in the closet, a couple trays, a Bessler enlarger, and I would walk the prints out to the bathroom and rinse them in the bathtub, when I was done processing. But when we got married and got a house, I built a darkroom, and I soon afterwards started thinking I'd like to try pinhole photography because I had been reading about it, and I wanted to make a box camera. And I think the first camera I built was I went to Hobby Lobby or some craft store, and I got one of these cardboard craft boxes.
Yeah, done.
And just put a piece of 4x5 paper in, maybe some black craft paper as a baffle, made a crude pinhole, a little pull shutter, and I was really amazed at the images, even though it was a poorly made pinhole. It was probably made from like high tin aluminum because it's not very thin, and the hole wasn't very good. But
what were you shooting at that point? What
kind of paper?
No, what kind of cameras before you started making the pinholes? What were you shooting at that point? Were you shooting 4x5s? Were you shooting 35?
I was shooting 35 and medium format. So you'd have to go back in time to maybe 1978 or 79 in Singapore. Me and a buddy, we're on the USS Constellation, the Connie, which is now razor blades. But we walk into a camera store in Singapore. We're shopping for camera gear. My buddy Ski, hi Paul, he buys a Nikon system. I buy a Minolta SRT 101. Was my first serious camera. And then this big European-looking guy in a black suit walks into the camera store, and he looks at us, and he says, "Me, Russian." And we figured he was a KGB guy, and he probably knew we were American sailors and all that.
Sure.
That's my funny little Singapore story. I had that Minolta system for a few years. I ended up replacing it with an X370. And I was basically shooting Minolta glass, black and white mostly. I got a Bronica ETRS sometime in the mid-'80s. Still have it. And I really loved shooting medium format. I like that format. Then I got an old speed graphic later on that I still have also, shooting 4x5. But mostly medium format, 35 millimeter. Kind of discovering for myself what street photography really is, but it really wasn't street photography in terms of people photography. It was mostly like urban documentarian kind of photography.
Okay.
That's what I enjoyed.
I have a book of Joe's street photography, which is excellent, but it involves no people.
Oh, yeah.
We live in a very non-pedestrian city.
Yeah, that was my second book, my second photo book. I was going through a bunch of pictures in my archive, and I started putting together these, quote, street pictures that I noticed didn't have any people in them. I started thinking that was a theme. So I named the book Implied Presence. And and it was interesting, yeah.
That's I do the exact same thing. In fact, I go through cities and wait for people to leave. I love the human world without the humans in it. That to me is something that I absolutely love.
All you need to accomplish that is a long shutter speed.
Well, sure, yeah.
Which brings us to pinhole photography.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I've done some of that in the city.
So, Joe, since I have known you, like I have seen your Minolta and Bronica cameras, and I've made you shoot with them once or twice when I needed some test rolls. But I mean, pretty much you. I wouldn't say you disdain, but you at least eschew regular film photography. I've pretty much just seen you shoot paper.
I've found, I guess, the economics of film processing, especially with color, unless you want to do it at home.
Yeah.
The lab that we have in Albuquerque does a pretty good job, but I think their film scanning on color film is not really great. They're using like a flatbed kind of scanner for film, and I just find that if I give them an SD card of digital photos from my Panasonic Micro Four Thirds camera, I get a better RA4 print from them than if I was to give them film and let them process the film and print it. And the additional cost of processing the film just ended up being, well, I can do it cheaper with only print the files I want, in color.
I don't think that this is actually the reason why you only shoot paper these days, and since I've met you.
Maybe not. I mean, part of it is time. I don't have as much time to do creative photography, just to go out, be a flaneur. That was our word this morning, is being a flaneur, right? Walking the streets with a camera. I don't do that as much anymore. And I really want to. But
do you think that's because you are busy with work and family and such, or do you think that's busy because, or that you're too busy because you spend so much time building cameras?
Lately, I haven't really built too many cameras. I have maybe this one here is the latest one I built last year, but I think it's that I have a YouTube channel, and all my off time, I'm thinking about what to do with that YouTube channel. A lot of it is not photographically related. It's stuff like
vloggers,
stuff like that. But yeah, so I find, I guess, a lot of people during the COVID thing found they were challenged to be creative. And I think I was already in maybe a creative funk of some kind before COVID, but at least maybe not a funk, at least more like I was interested more in making things and shooting photos in the last couple of years. Yeah, and I guess every creative person goes through those ups and down cycles, right? You get interested in certain things, and then you lose interest and do other things, and then you come back to the first thing. But
right.
I do have this desire, though, to really move my photography to some other level. I'm not sure what that means yet, but
okay. So
before we go on, I had a really brief question. Isn't chip making essentially a lot of it derived from photography?
Yeah, it is. So photolithography is one of the primary technologies of being able to make chips, right? And they use but you think of it as a quartz plate that's a photographic positive. It's a slide, and it's coated with chrome metal circuit pattern. Right? And these chrome plates are called reticles, and they're about 5 inches square. They're in cassettes, so they're very clean, and they are loaded into a machine called a stepper, and it's the opposite of a photographic enlarger. It's a photographic reducer. You have a 5-inch, negative, or really a slide positive, and you shrink the image down to the size of your fingernail, roughly, on a 12-inch silicon wafer, and use the wafer steps, and it repeatedly prints all these circuit patterns. And there's probably 100 layers of these kinds of masks that are done in the process of making a chip. There's like 1,000 steps or more on the more modern processes, from going from a bare silicon wafer to a finished wafer with functional integrated circuits on it.
Wow.
Yeah, and and the technology is such that the older processes that are currently being used use 192 nanometer laser light, which is ultraviolet light, and they can print down to about 10 nanometer features. Now you wonder, how can you print something that's a fraction of the wavelength of light, right? And it involves interference patterns.
Pinhole diffraction.
Yeah, it's sort of controlled diffraction to be able to get features much smaller than the wavelength of light that you're printing with.
Sounds
But
good.
now
So
we're at the,
you're reading the interference, basically.
yeah, there's an X and a Y, so the circuits are rectilinear kind of. But the new technology is, how do you make laser light that's much shorter wavelength than 192 nanometers? And what they're doing is a machine that takes a drop of molten tin, they drop it through a vacuum chamber, and they blast it with 192 nanometer laser light, and it turns into a plasma and emits 10 nanometer deep UV. And they take that light that you can't focus with glass, you have to use mirrors. And they have this big, huge machine with hyperbolic surfaces, front surface mirrors, and they use that light. And it's a burst mode kind of a technology, right? So that's the latest
sounds a
step
little
of
bit
technology.
like harness. I've got a pulse welder that's producing some pretty intense light.
Hey, Nick, move your microphone closer. You're a little low, but
I would have to bend. I would have to rip my ear out.
okay. So Joe, what you're saying is you're Leibowitz, right?
Yeah.
You're the one who, in 1,000 years.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So does any of your professional life inform your building of cameras today? Is there anything? Is there bleed over? Do you get ideas on?
That's an interesting question. And I have spent a lot of time in the fab walking around in times when I don't have to think deeply about something. I can kind of daydream just walking a corridor, like a quarter-mile walk to get out of the fab. Maybe I'm thinking about something.
Uh-huh.
The technology itself hasn't really directly inspired me, but what does inspire me is the interior architecture of the fab is all grids of rectangles. The floors are perforated metal panels, and the walls are all made of aluminum panels and different rectangles. And maybe about 10 years ago, I started getting the idea for grid cameras, like a pinhole camera with multiple chambers and multiple pinholes, and you can make these gridded kind of images. And that was directly inspired by just being in an environment that was all rectangles, metallic surfaces and everything. That was more of a visual inspiration.
I'd like to point out that it used to be that mankind would let's say work in a factory and dream of more efficient and higher tech factories. And Joe works in a computer chip factory and dreams of making pixelated cameras out of wood and paper.
Yes.
There are a couple of things. Do you know the Instagram? He sells Lumen cameras?
Yeah.
Hoderman?
Yeah. I have one of his cameras, in fact, a couple of them.
Have you seen the grid things that he's been doing? I think it slits. And he's doing some, rather than pinholes, they're slits, and been working with, I assume it's paper, because he's been getting a lot of color work and some other things with that.
Is he using them as lumen prints?
Yeah, I think that there's still lumen prints, but it's worth looking back at his Instagram.
I'm gonna look at that. That's that's interesting.
Yeah. So we have architect. Oh, and that does remind me of one other thing. Is have you seen the photographs that have been made with straws?
Yes.
Like plastic straws.
Oh, I have a story about that. So I started making one of those cameras. I actually built several prototypes, and one of those makes about a 3-inch square image. It's like I don't know what, 30 by 30. And there was a period about 8 years ago when I was buying up a certain brand. It was like Blue Diamond brand, these black coffee stir sticks. They're like an 1/8
Oh, yeah,
inch
yeah, yeah.
diameter, and they come in a
Ooh.
plastic box. I was buying them out of every Target store in Albuquerque, and I'm sure some data cruncher in Target's corporate headquarters is wondering what the hell is going on with coffee stir sticks in Albuquerque, you know. But
And
so
then they
yeah,
shipped a dozen gross pallets.
right, exactly. Now they can't sell it. But I was working on an 8x10 version, and it's maybe 3/4 finished. But I had to build this wooden frame and a cardboard front with all these holes so you could support the tubes. And anyways, the problem is those tubes bend the way I was
Yeah.
doing it, and then when they bend, you don't get the light through. And I couldn't get a really good image out of the one I spent months and months working on. But after I knew Ethan, we started working on using his CAD software just to design, like, how could you optimize that kind of a straw camera?
We lost
Yeah.
so many days
Yeah,
in like
Yeah.
4 iterations of this camera.
yeah.
I'm wondering, and this is something I wouldn't know, but I'm thinking of glass rods. I'm wondering if
Yeah.
a series of glass rods. Now you couldn't, it wouldn't be economical to make an 8x10, but you could probably make a
That's
35
exactly
or
how like the NPC and Forscher backs worked for putting Polaroids on a 35 millimeter medium format cameras. They had a piece of fiber optic glass, which was basically a bunch of glass rods to.
Oh yeah, okay.
transfer.
I did come up with a similar idea or a similar concept that I call the Pixelator Camera. And what the Pixelator is a grid, a grid of cells, and they're open front and back. And you put a sheet of a translucent view screen on the front of it, and you project an image from either a lens or a pinhole camera onto that screen. And then at the back of the cells that are open, you put a sheet of photographic paper. And what happens is you have a coherent image projected onto the front of each cell, but then the light gets averaged into some average level by the time it gets to the back where the film is.
Okay,
so
sure.
An example would be if you had a cell that was half shadow and half highlight, it would print maybe a neutral middle gray image, right?
Yeah.
So I'm able to get, I built variations on these things, and I'm able to get these pixelated digital looking images with photo paper. And when you go down the rabbit hole of this kind of craziness, you walk through the hardware store in the lighting section, and you're looking at fluorescent light diffusers, those plastic grids, and you start thinking, oh God, I could build a 20 by 30-inch camera and have half-inch pixels, and that's the craziness. But it works. It actually works, and you only need a pinhole roughly the size of the grid, so it can be fairly fast, with the caveat that you lose some light through the projection screen, because you have to average it out. So that was my real invention, was the Pixelator camera.
Congratulations! You've discovered 8-bit.
Yeah,
I've discovered
not even.
Well, it's funny. It's continuous tone, right? The gray tones are continuous, but discrete from each other. Yeah, the spatial resolution is finite and limited, but the tonal resolution is full.
Yeah,
full gray scale of silver negative paper.
Now, if only we could make continuous tone across space.
Well, what I'd like to try is revisit this idea with the reversal process, peroxide reversal process, and get direct positive pixelator images.
Fine.
Might be fun.
Yeah, so Joe is constantly like, we like to hang out on Tuesdays. Joe has like a weird schedule, and I just work around it. And, Tuesday is like my day to play, which means, we don't go push each other on the swings or anything. We make stuff, but it's the day that I generally make stuff that doesn't have to be sold. But generally, I like to make stuff.
What have you been working on lately?
We'll get there.
Okay.
I gotta play some roll music in between.
Okay.
But generally, I like for those projects to maybe give me some. It's fine. Pointed at you. You're the guest. I like for those projects to give me some knowledge that I might apply in the future towards a product. And there are always projects that Joe is trying to, catch me on his hook into like 3D printing and laser cutting a typewriter. Or this Pixelator camera is one that, we started. I mean, Joe's been doing this for years before I met him, and then one of the first things we did together was like resin print a tiny Pixelator camera. And I said like, Joe, this is never going to be a product. I can't work on this. And then like a week later, I had lost 3 days designing this print. And the Pixelator camera, I have like very mixed feelings about because it's an extremely interesting idea to me, but also I know I could easily lose a month perfecting this and then never be able to sell them. Although over here I have a almost 8-foot tall buck for building a Bellows on. I have built. While I would like to keep it as a tool, it is too big for my shop, and so maybe we will just turn that into a sculpture camera.
A sculpture. So, getting back to the straw camera, the drinking straw camera. After Ethan and I started working on how do you optimize the design to be manufacturable, I finally came up with the idea that instead of using straws, if you have an aperture plate in the front of the camera with a grid of holes, and then halfway back, let's say, you have an aperture plate with a single hole, then you have one discrete path for every one of those holes. You're basically making a pinhole image of the aperture plate. It's kind of like a crudely drawn, like that, right there.
Sure.
That does the same thing as a drinking straw camera without having to use straws.
The benefit of that is that we could cut the plates on the laser rather than trying to 3D print something.
I'm just thinking about if you take, so for an 8x10, you've got a 0.5 millimeter hole on a pinhole. Are you then, by putting another hole behind that, you've got, say, let's do F150. Now are we 1/50th or F150 of that?
No.
So the way it works
does that work?
Think of it as a virtual tube, a hole here in the front, hole in the middle.
Okay.
The angle of view of the tube is twice the focal ratio of the tube itself. Like you could get from the upper left to the lower right to upper left. The angle of view is double the length to diameter ratio of the tube.
If you design it right, it doesn't choke down the light at all.
Right, and you can design the length and the diameters so that the image circles kind of converge close to each other with the film plane.
Yeah. And the other thing that I'm thinking is you're going to get in your corners, you're going to get ovals.
And you could cut holes on the laser cutter to compensate for that.
And
for spherical aberration control.
That may be something I wouldn't want to
right.
You
can make them like coma shaped toward the edge, and when you look at them at an angle, they're circles.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they call him. That's why they call him Graham Aberration.
Yes.
Absolutely. We have to be conscious that we are not looking at it with our eyes, but we're looking at it with an intermediate machine.
Yeah.
At least that's my photography experience.
Well, that was one of my attractions to Pinhole, by the way, is the fact that the light that is illuminating, let's say, an outdoor subject, came from the sun, from a fusion reaction in the sun, through space, through the atmosphere, reflected off the subject, and goes right to the film through the pinhole without any intermediary mediation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Unless you shoot it at night, in which case you have the moon reflection.
Moonlight. And that's a moon reflector.
And
Yeah.
it all falls apart when you look at the print, and then it goes into your brain.
Yeah.
That's the mediation part.
Yeah.
That's right.
Everything's a simulation. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So I think this is probably a good intro a little bit into who Joe Van Cleave is. If you haven't seen his YouTube videos, pause this, go watch a few, come back. But maybe,
unless you're driving.
Yeah, unless you're driving, keep driving, keep listening. Maybe now is a good time to stop, and then in the next two sections we'll talk about specifically some of Joe's cameras, and then what Joe and I have been working on for the last 3 months.
Okay.
2.5 years.
Into a vest pocket. A vest pocket.
Okay. Do you guys want to take a short break, or you want me to just roll through?
I say we
tea or
roll through.
coffee.
Okay, rolling through. Hold on, here we go. Playing the music, you can't hear it, but it's going out to YouTube.
So yeah, I'm gonna be leaving our or
Okay.
to do all the cool.
He's got to go get dumpster juice.
Dirt.
You guys are being recorded.
That kind of juice.
Okay, and we're back.
Yeah, there we go.
Before any more conversation about dumpster juice. All right, Joe, you and I have looked at your camera collection, which is, or 30, 40 cameras built over almost my entire lifetime.
Amazing. Wow.
They were great. And we made some videos about that, and I have a thumb drive in one of these drawers labeled Joe, where you were scanning all of the drawings of them to make a coffee table book, which
Eventually get made.
Yeah, I hope. But you brought a couple cameras today. Why don't you show them off?
Okay. So this is a 4x5 basic plywood box camera. It has the property of being able to have the shutter behind the pinhole. So I'm going to loosen up one of these brass screws. There's a plate that you can pull off the pinhole, and you can put a viewing hole in there if you want to use the view screen in the back and actually view it on the view screen. But the shutter is internal to the camera, and it's hard to pull right now because it's been in storage for a while. The back of it has a brown plastic view screen on a frame, and that is the shutter right there. It's hard to see. Of course, it be dark, and I can't pull it up right now because humidity or something. Anyway, so that shutter pulls up. It's behind the pinhole, and I have a viewing hole right here. And anyways, it takes a 4x5 film holder. These little offset dowels sections act like cams. You can lock a film holder in there, turn it, and lock it in place. I have viewing dots. The shutter is the front, and then you have some viewing dots on the side, little brads. So it makes a very accurate way to line up your composition. It has a tripod nut on the bottom, very robust, made of 1/2-inch plywood, or 3/8 plywood maybe. And this is one of my favorite cameras just because it's so rugged and easy to take out on the road and do stuff like that.
That's a classic Joe camera. It really reminds me of the Leonardo pinhole, but if they were not restricted by production cost,
or not just the Leonardo, but the Santa Barbara as well.
Santa Barbara, right? Yep. Yeah. Now I originally had a dowel running across the back, and I used a wedge in there to wedge the film holder, but it was obstructing the field of view, so I changed it to these little cams, and I get a full view of the back. So the next camera is a homemade cardboard box with a steel plate stuck on the front, and when you open it up, so you first of all you mount this box to a wooden plate that goes on a tripod. And then the box is a holder for 9 film capsule pinhole cameras, and each one is labeled, and there's a little colored dot that tells you where the pinhole is, and it's a sliding shutter. There you go. You just it's a little ring that pulls up.
Oh, okay.
Like that, and
so the box is not the
capsule.
The box is not the camera. The box is the holder for 9 cameras.
Yeah, the box is the holder, but there is a magnet in the bottom of each camera, and you can stick the little cameras on the little plate here, and then you can adjust the tripod and use it as the mount. And then typically what I do is when I'm done shooting that one, I put it upside down in the box so I can tell which one has been exposed. Like that one's been exposed, and then I can go to number 2.
And is there? You're usually shooting paper with this again?
Yeah, I shoot paper. Oftentimes, I'll shoot Harman direct positive paper.
Sure.
And so they end up being like 2-inch square, roughly. Whatever you can fit, maybe just slightly 1 3/4 inch.
Yeah. For people who are listening while driving or just listening to the podcast, the box is it's a little bit bigger than the box that you would buy a bulk roll of film in. And it has 9 cylinders, and the cylinders are roughly the size of a 35 millimeter film can.
That's what they are.
They are 35 millimeter film caps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so these are the plastic canisters that go
Cheap,
around the
plentiful, designed to be light tight.
And not the Fuji kind.
Yeah.
But the black kind with a black cap.
Yeah. Okay.
And I have a little ring of gaffer's tape, cardboard, that acts like a pull shutter. It pulls out. There are pinholes mounted on the side of the canister. So the film plane wraps in a semi-cylinder around.
Now, I shoot a ton of pinhole, but I shoot almost exclusively film. What shutter speeds are we talking about for Harman positive? And I'm guessing you have about a 0.1 millimeter pinhole?
Yeah, roughly 0.1. I would rate it at ISO 3 to ISO, and maybe in the summer, ISO 3. In the depths of the winter, you may go down to ISO 1.5 or something. So typical shutter speeds are like maybe 20 seconds, 30 seconds in bright sun.
Okay.
Not a lot of light fall off of such a tiny camera.
Yeah, you've got about a 10 millimeter focal length on that.
Yeah,
or 10 millimeter.
Probably 20. Whatever the diameter of the canister is.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
almost an inch.
17, 18.
I really hope the lensless guys are listening to this thinking, we should have gotten Joe on.
Well, the nice thing about these Harman prints is you get a little square direct positive image that'll fit in the palm of your hand. And they look surprisingly sharp because they're so small.
I also enjoy this set of cameras because you could shoot for a relatively long time. You just go out with basically a camera that fits in your pocket and get 9 pictures with it, which with pinhole could, take me half a day. And they're, almost free to make.
Right.
They are.
Right.
It's really just having the dark room to cut the paper and load the cameras, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So that's a fun camera. I made a slightly bigger version of these with PVC pipe that make 2.5 or 3 inch square pictures the same way. But that takes a little bit more work. You have to glue the end caps on the bottom and, drill the plastic and all that. It's a lot more fun just using film canisters because it's just repurposing a photographic throwaway item, right?
Right.
This one is very beautiful.
This is probably the most recent camera I built, and the idea was a ultra wide angle 4x5, and this kind of represents the kind of construction technique I like to use, which is I go to the hardware store,
by the way,
I try to find materials that I can purpose with minimal amounts of construction. So this is like 5/8 inch square poplar sticks, the kind you get at Lowe's hardware store. These are the 1.5-inch poplar sticks that
Okay.
are already finished grade. You just need to cut them good on a miter saw. I used a pneumatic nail gun and glued them the corners together. Some 1/8-inch model aircraft plywood, a little pivoting shutter with a nylock mounted screw. So this shutter is nice and snug with a little stop there. And then I got tired of using elastic bands. I got tired of using rubber bands on cameras like this, and I decided I needed springs. So what I did is mounted these screw eyes to the side of the camera and attached these springs here with some brass rods, and there is a set of springs in the back. So this plate here, you basically slide a film holder in here, and this pressure plate keeps the film holder pushed nicely up against the flange of the camera.
Wow.
There is a 1/4-20 tripod mount on the bottom, and it's a nice little wide-angle camera. You can kind of get an idea of the focal length and the angle of view there. Pretty wide angle, like 120 degrees.
Yeah. Joe, I got to
I highly approve of this construction method and material use.
Yeah. Hey, Ethan, bring me up. Joe, I got to show you this. There we go.
Yeah.
And so this is made out of hickory flooring. In fact, the floor that I'm sitting on. Okay, so that's a hickory flooring board. It has a piece of plywood for the front, and here I've got there we go. So it's just slide up, slide down. I have a handle for carrying it. Now I have the 1/4-20 as well, but unfortunately that creates a hole. So there we go. So I put 1/4-inch, long 1/4-inch bolts in there to just keep it light tight in the meantime. But I am sticking with the elastic hair bands.
Yes.
For those people, I'm holding on with elastic hair bands.
Are those the ones you use for your hair?
Yes, I do. I gather it up after I shave my head, and I bind them into bands. So we are now. Mine are. This is obviously a little bit longer focal length than yours.
I feel like
the focal length is dictated by the width of the board that that the hickory came in, the hickory flooring came in. So, okay, so what were you looking for? Let's talk about the image that you created with that.
Yeah,
heavily vignetted for a super wide.
Yeah, I like that look.
Uh-huh.
I like the idea of the light fall off to the edge and having the kind of the linear wide angle distortion of being able to come into a camera, into a subject matter close, and having it darken toward the corners. There's a certain look about that tends to isolate a subject matter better than a more normal angle of view camera where everything is the same exposure. It's hard to get a sense of depth and layering to your image. Sometimes I think these wide angle cameras do that better.
Also, there's less room than you might expect in the world famous Joe Van Cleef backyard to shoot landscapes.
That's right.
Okay.
Well, so one challenge, though, to shooting these wide angle cameras is the camera ends up being a source of shadows if you're getting up close to something. If you want to get something fairly large, you have to be close. And so the strategy, and this is especially a problem in the northern hemisphere in the winter when the sun angle is low in the south, but the strategy is if this is the camera and this is my subject matter, you have to position them so that the sun is kind of coming into the gap between them, side lighting the subject, and that way the shadow of the camera won't get onto the image, onto the subject.
It also gives you some pretty dramatic light to show the relief of the object itself.
Yes. So if you're doing like a subject that you can move, that's a good way to do it. Or if it's something like a tree, you can move the camera until the sun angle is ideal for that exposure.
Yeah.
But that's something to keep in mind with a ultra wide angle camera. You
Yeah.
have that problem
And
of the camera shadow becoming part of the image.
yeah. So the focal length on that's about 1 inch, right? Am I?
No,
It's about an
45
inch,
millimeters.
It's an inch and a quarter, roughly.
Okay.
I'd say. Whatever
So that's
the width
yeah.
of that board is.
Okay.
Yeah,
Inch and a
yeah.
half.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's inch and a quarter on that board, but plus the depth
Plus
of
the
film
eighth
holder.
inch, so it's about an
Yeah.
inch and a half. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a 50, a 60.
It's very
so
wide.
in there, which is pretty wide for a 4x5.
Yeah.
Let me.
And you can also use this as a film clapper.
Yeah.
Too.
Okay. So here's my question. We're talking pinholes. So I'm going to show that I have a little piece of beer can. This is from those of you in Florida. This is from Killer Whale Cream Ale. But it is attached to my PCB. There we go. My PCB drills. Is this what you're using to make your pinholes? How? And then the other thing is, how much of a Nazi are you about getting a perfectly round hole for pinholes?
Those are great questions.
Yeah.
I use sewing needles, usually put into a wine bottle cork, and so you obviously have to drink a bottle of wine first.
Oh, it's horrible. And a can of beer.
Yeah,
you have
a can of beer. Well, so I use 2 mil thick sheet brass, which is 0.002 inch thick.
Okay.
Brass. I will cut about an inch square, which is 2.5 centimeters for you Europeans. And I will dimple with I have a metal punch with a dull tip. I will dimple it on a piece of soft material like cardboard to get a dimple. Then I will put the tip of the sewing needle into the dimple side down, and rotate the piece of brass actually until you barely start to tear through the tip of the dimple with the tip of the needle. And then I'll start sanding that on a piece of 600 grit emery using figure 8 sanding pattern until you start making a clean hole on the tip of the dimple. So the tip of the dimple is thinner than the 2 mil brass, because when you dimple it down, it squishes the brass and make it thinner. And then you inspect it with a loupe to see how uniform it is, and then I measure it by getting a millimeter scale, putting the piece of brass behind it so that the hole is half shown, half of it's poking up on the scale, and then with a loupe, I measure how many diameters will fit in a millimeter.
Sure.
And then you just take the inverse of that, and that's the diameter in millimeters.
I've done a measurement using a flatbed scanner and set it to 1,000 pixels per centimeter, and then doing the math from that.
I'd try that, and I think what I find is sometimes I'm targeting a certain pinhole size, like for a certain camera design. Yeah. And I will start out making it as small as I can, which I think the smallest I've been able to do is about 0.15 millimeters by hand, and where they're uniform. And then from there, to make it larger, like if you had to go to 0.2 or 0.3, you just barely touch the needle to the hole and do a little turning with barely any pressure, do a little figure 8 sanding of it, remeasure it, and you just enlarge it until you get to the point where you want to stop.
Okay.
That's kind of how I make them, and it is an iterative process, and it's a lot more convenient doing it that way than having to go back and forth to your flatbed scanner to measure it. The second question, though, you asked was regarding how important is it to get the right size. I've seen some wonderful
not only the right size, but the perfectly round.
Oh, okay. I think perfectly round is probably more important than the ideal size. But I've seen some wonderful soft pinhole images that were not from the ideal pinhole size in
Yeah.
terms of sharpness, but especially in small gauge film, black and white film images, where when you enlarge them, you get a lot of grain along with a really soft image. There's something about the soft image with the sharp grain that kind of, they play off each other. It works really well for a certain kind of image. But I've also looked at, the ideal sharp pinhole, and it's really a matter of, if you want the sharpest pinhole image, you really need a larger format. It's all about, if you look at the optimal, the Rayleigh Criterion formula, the longer the focal length, the higher of an F ratio you can have.
Yeah.
For the ideal pinhole size.
Oh,
that works up until the F number is so big that you get reciprocity failure and your exposures are too long.
Or you start getting physically around the size of a wavelength of light, and you get
well, the Rayleigh Criterion will give you that, right? You're not going to make it too small, but
I'm not familiar with that. Can you explain the
so Lord Rayleigh was a British or English scientist in the 19th century, and he basically came up with the formula for, if you kept making the aperture of a lens smaller and smaller, at a certain point the image won't be any sharper than the diffraction image of the light itself, and that's the optimal size of a pinhole.
What's that work out to be?
For a given wavelength,
something like that.
Is that what is the Mr. Pinhole is what I use? I ballpark it and I usually don't actually measure or review my pinholes. I cut them, and you can kind of tell when they cut cleanly. And I use the drills, and you can tell when they cut cleanly and when they don't, and I just throw them in there based on the size of the drill that I use. So I'm a little bit more loosey-goosey with that.
There's different philosophies of how you approach pinhole photography.
Yeah.
There are people who are like the typical middle-aged guy, large format photographer guy, who wants everything made of brass and cherry wood and precisely made pinholes, and to go out in the landscape and try to make as sharp of a picture as possible.
Yeah, it's called.
There's the other side of the coin, is throwing together cardboard boxes and poke a hole in something to go out and make art, right?
Yeah. I'm with you on that. I guess I'm at that end.
And they're both good. They're both equally valid approaches, right? Depends on what you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to ask you then one more question on pinholes, or let you move on to the next camera. What is it about pinhole that you like? What about a pinhole image is compelling?
I think it's the unlimited or nearly unlimited depth of field.
Okay.
The fact that you can get angles of view wider than what is practical with refractive optics. And you can have pinhole images on curved film planes. You can warp the paper film in the camera, right? For anamorphic kind of projections. But I think another part of it is more philosophical with me, is I like the idea that the light is unmediated. And what the pinhole serves to do is what's called a phase selector. It's selectively choosing only the rays of light that are approximately in phase with each other, as Ethan laughs.
Oh, that's good.
So, you think about, behind my shoulder, that shiny thing on the wall is reflecting light in all directions. But if you were to isolate it to a narrow angle of view, you would get only a narrow phase, light that's in phase. Yeah.
Okay. I believe that shiny thing on the wall is Weird Al's Alapalooza cassette tape.
And of course it's appropriate.
The first cassette I ever bought.
Oh man, Foreigner 4 was the first cassette. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Dirty Deeds from Casey. That was my first cassette.
So
Um,
I like the look of Pinhole um, because it looks kind of dreamlike. It's not going to be as sharp as a lens, even if you try to optimize it. But it
yeah.
looks like the way things look like when I remember something from a dream. Or if you think about the way your visual cortex works, where you have a central part of your vision that's sharp and everything else is sort of much less distinct around the edge in your peripheral vision, that's kind of the way it reminds me of Pinhole.
I also think, like, knowing a little bit about you and the way you like to work, it has something to do with Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Is that Pinhole can be done really well or really quickly,
Mm-hmm.
like in a series of film cans,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you can make beautiful objects like this,
Yeah.
tank of a plywood camera. You can kind of go at any level
Right.
of construction and still
Mhm.
make a functional thing.
So
But I'm not
light is
opposed to using glass in lenses. In fact, I would love to rebuild this camera as a sliding box camera and use an adapted lens of some kind. That would be another fun project. Um, yeah,
so
which we can do.
I would like to see you make an underwater version. You'd have to put glass in front of your pinhole, and you'd probably need very, very bright lights. But
I mean, Nick, you're forgetting we live in the desert. First, we'd need water.
I'm sure, well, but with that wide angle, you could manage with a little wading pool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. There's a good lens.
Yeah.
Well, I like the idea of adapted optics.
Yeah.
So some of the early cameras in the 19th century that were called pinhole were actually hybrid lenses because the emulsions back then were so slow they couldn't really do pinhole photography. If you've ever tried to do pinhole photography with a daguerreotype or something, it's just too slow, right? So
Sure.
some of the early pinhole images were actually glass lenses that were stopped down to near the Rayleigh limit. And I like that. I like the idea of a hybrid pinhole fixed glass or refractive lens combination because you can get sharper images than with a pinhole itself, but you have enough uh, depth of field latitude that you don't need to focus the camera.
Or you could
Dom,
trade off, right, and get
yeah.
reasonably sharp pictures at a pretty quick
Right.
shutter speed.
Dom Silverthorne, who is lens_punk on Instagram, has been doing a lot of experiments with that type of approach, and so it's down the path. There are people going down that path right now.
Yes.
150 years later.
Oh, yeah.
So everything's that's new under the sun has been under the sun before. Exactly.
Well, we live in a great age, right?
Yeah.
Because we still have black and white and color film and paper, and we have digital cameras and scanners and stuff too. So
absolutely. We're in the second golden age of photography, as I've
one other kind of camera that I'd really like to talk about, and I didn't bring an example. It kind of occupied my mind for years when I first started making pinhole cameras, is I was interested in the challenge of how do you shoot more than one image at a time when you go out on a photo trip without carrying sheet film holders. And it was just a technical challenge. And I ended up making a series of falling plate cameras. I didn't bring one with me, but the idea is essentially a series of mat boards or little thin metal plates stacked up in the back of the camera. And I have a system of slots with a knob that slides back and forth, and you can make the front plate fall down to the bottom of the camera after you've taken the picture. And I think the largest one I made was an 8-inch by 8-inch format, a big wooden cube that was kind of like built like this. I made a later one that was like a 5 by 8-inch with a sheet of what do you call it? The aluminum flashing rolls of flashing you buy at the hardware store, glued onto a stick frame with epoxy to make a really lightweight metal camera. That was a falling plate camera. So I made a number of these falling plate cameras that satisfied that. You just tape the photo paper to the front of each plate with a loop of masking tape. And the only thing that keeps it from working good is if the camera falls over in the trunk of your car when you're driving, then the film plates that have already fallen will probably get jumbled and block the others from falling. So you have to kind of put it in a big cardboard box with a weight in it so it keeps it from tipping over.
It's a gravity-dependent camera.
A gravity-dependent camera.
True. It's not a space camera.
You can't use it in orbit.
Okay, so I love the idea. How I'm thinking the Graphmatic backs are similar, right?
Yeah.
But I kind of like the idea of that falling plate as well.
And there's a lot of ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Go ahead.
Should we take a quick break and then talk about what Joe and I have been up to lately?
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Cue the music.
I'm going to cue the music and then also be right back. Oops.
Okay.
Not the one.
Are we? That works. It's not that one, is it?
Nope, not that one. Back in 5. Okay. Yeah, so if anybody's watching live, this is where we will cut between frames and everybody will take a stretch. I'm going to grab some more coffee. I was up till 1 working on this thing. All right, be right back.
Are we getting more coffee? We don't have to. We could have RC Cola.
Oh, yeah. Would you like an RC Cola?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Back in 5. Like what? Put the dollars case official cola of the Lumen Camera podcast.
Royal Kelvin. Okay. Graham, Nick, you there? Hello.
Oh, I was muted. I was rebutting that Diet Bright was the official cola, the Homemade Camera podcast. But I'm drinking Diet Sam's Choice because I'm cheap as hell. And I went and bought 6 2-liters of Diet Sam's Choice, and because I was away from home and I needed something else, I bought a Diet Dr. Pepper in a 20-ounce. It was $2.39 for the Diet Dr. Pepper and 78 cents per 2-liter. Now, you just kind of do the math there.
Okay. Nick is back. I'm going to roll the roll. Here we go.
Okay. You didn't like my conversation. That's fine. I see.
I don't want to hear about colas unless we're turning them into cameras.
Or film development.
Cola camera. Hey, it looks like we're frozen. Are we frozen?
No, we're not frozen. I was running the music. You just don't hear it over Google Meets, but the folks at home hear it. Okay, so Joe and I were outside. We wanted to talk about what we've been working on and what we have to work on today, but we were kind of talking more about straw cameras, and I did my classic, like, shut up, let's save it for the podcast. What were we talking about?
Well, I got on the subject of, you've probably seen this recently on Petapixel, a guy that made essentially a camera obscura with a white reflective frame in the back of the camera, and he has a hole in the front of the camera next to the lens
digital camera
to shoot it with a digital camera. And what it really is a camera obscura that you can photograph the image with a digital camera. Instead of sketching on it like we did 300 years ago.
This is the lens I'm going to do for that type of camera.
Oh,
it's a process lens I got from Mark of the FPP.
Wait, are you going to just rephotograph it with the digital camera?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's going to be necessarily digital, but I'm going to do that method.
Okay, so I got to jump in. Speaking of process lenses, and what we talked about earlier with regards to semiconductor manufacturing, there was an old Nikon Body 9 stepper in the older fab I worked in. And a friend of mine was working to demo the equipment. And he got all the optics out of the machine. And he gave me a couple of the lenses. And the big lens that he gave me is almost this big in diameter.
The thing weighs like 30 pounds.
And it's in a
diameter.
metal.
Joe just held up a disc the size of a 12-inch record.
Yeah. It is 1 meter focal length, and it's probably optimized for ultraviolet light at a certain wavelength. But it's about 35 or 40 pounds, weighs heavier than a typewriter. And I would think that would make a great camera lens.
I think it would require a tank camera that you could never move.
That's right.
We played with this for a little bit. I think there are better choices.
There are better choices.
It's very impressive.
It is impressive.
Right? That lens probably would have cost more than your house and my house together.
When it was new, that was probably several $100,000.
And just think, when you go out to shoot it, you do need to stay away from the sun.
Oh, you do. Yes. Well, I have from when I was a TV repairman, I have a 36-inch diagonal Fresnel lens from a Mitsubishi projection TV. And it is wonderful for setting 2x4s on fire, burning ant nests, burning weeds. in
That's
the bright
right.
sun.
And QLab Gunner still had up in the attic like one of those Fresnel lenses that he turned into a death ray. It's a pretty fun demo.
Directed energy weapon.
It's a pizza heater. It's a pizza maker. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You can heat one pepperoni extremely hot.
But you do have to be careful when you're carrying it. You have to hold it edgewise, pointed to your body. Like you don't carry it like that. It'll burn a hole in your leg.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
In about 2 seconds, it'll set a 2x4 on fire in bright New Mexico sun.
Dang.
We got no
Dang,
atmosphere.
dang.
Okay.
So you were out talking about how to design the best death ray.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it you came up with?
Oh, we were talking about the idea of building a camera with the screen that's rephotographed on like petapixel. It's you know what?
Yeah.
When we talked to Sam Throxell, he did not have the ability to make ground glass, so he actually made his focusing system like this, where he stood in front of the camera and looked at a white piece of paper to focus, and then closed that hole and took a picture. Which I thought that was a really elegant, beautiful solution. I am so not interested in building a huge, large format camera only to photograph it with my cell phone or my Sony. Like, just paper's cheap. Stick a piece of paper in there.
Sure.
I mean, to each his own. And we've certainly seen some beautiful cameras made, like in the first Homemade Camera podcast.
Okay.
And I forget who it was, but that's not something that I want to build.
Think of this as the 21st camera or 21st century Afghan box camera, where you set something up and you take your digital picture and you run it out of a selfie printer.
Okay, so
that's.
I have a Afghan box camera that I built. It started out as a little 3x4 inch roughly format. I enlarged it to 4x6, and the box camera is about 12 by 12 by about 25 inches. And then a few months ago, I decided to take I have an iPod Touch device that's a little bit smaller than an iPhone.
Uh-huh.
And I decided to rebuild the inside of the camera so I can mount the iPod Touch up against the front of the camera, focus the view screen on the thing, and print digital images off my iPod Touch onto paper. And the way it works is you take a digital photo with your iOS device and you invert the image to be a black and white negative. And there are several ways to do it. You can get an app, a photo app, or you can do the screen grab mode in the inverted image, like a
accessibility
mode you do on the thing. Anyway, you can get a negative image on your iOS device and then go full screen with it. Set it in the box, close it up, and I have a little shutter in front of the thing, and pull the shutter out and make an exposure onto black and white paper using the internal lens, and it works.
I think that this is like a horrible deterioration of the original all analog box camera. I'm not like one of these people who's like, oh, everything has to be analog. It's so much warmer to play video games on CDs instead of Steam. But like also, the digital intermediary.
We just had a Chad sighting there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I wanted to explore the idea, see how it worked. It does work. It makes the process of making portraits out in public a lot more convenient, because you can pose somebody in better lighting. You're not limited to the box has to sit on a tripod and they have to sit in a chair. You can pose somebody with nicer light, then print their image in the box.
Sorry, I have to replace my battery. My battery will only do half an episode on my camera. So, and I think Nick is trying to talk to us, but he is not. His audio is not coming through. But so Yeah.
What we were talking about during the break also was getting into your project, Ethan's project of making this massive bellows for the 20 by 24 inch camera.
Yeah, so I'll grab some things that we can look at. I think, let's see. Last time Joe's made some videos about the 4x5 and 8x10 self-developing backs and the Go, and we talked about it on the podcast 2 episodes ago.
The Oggo?
Yeah, so Joe and I have a date with the QLab folks to demo this giant camera that we've been building. I'm gonna pull out some parts of it. It's getting totally disassembled today, and all of 99% of the pieces are getting swapped. We pulled it out, we shot with it the other day. It worked, but it had some issues.
Are you going to do a demonstration image today, or a demonstration shoot for us?
Not for you. It's the camera's going to get disassembled, but here, I'll show you some parts. Hold on.
And as Ethan goes off camera,
yeah,
for the parts, I will show
so
you.
Joe, what do you, besides being an enabler on this project? Yes. Oh, okay. So he's just shown us a picture of the Bellows. Now, the picture that he has shown us kind of looks like the front end of an old dragster. Yes. Or it could be the front end. Over. Yeah, or it could be the front end of an X-wing. So something along those lines. So these Bellows are okay. So Ethan's about to show.
Yeah,
us.
So we'll get back to the Bellows and why we're building them with such crazy tools. But this thing is working now. I got a backup here. My headphone cable is not that long, but this thing is here and it works.
It's a 20 by 24 inch
doesn't need to get rebuilt.
Self-developing batch.
Yeah. Okay. So for the people who are just listening, think about a 20 or a 32 inch flat screen TV, 32 inch Samsung LCD, LED, whatever they are now. And so that's the size that we've got. Now it's 20 by 24 inch opening. It looks to be, 2 inches deep?
Yeah, 1.5 inches deep.
1.5 inches deep. It's got a dark slide the size of my house.
Yeah.
It's got a dark slide. There we go. Okay. There and there. Okay. So what's the material for the dark slide?
That is a trade secret right now. Not because it's my trade secret, but I got it from Jeff Perry, so he'll tell you what the dark slide material is. Or
okay, so the
I will tell you after. Yeah.
Yeah. The dark slide is made out of
adamantium.
Adamantium? No, unobtainium. Because I think it's an SR-71 Blackbird skin. So it's what was that? Titanium?
Not that far off.
So anyway, it's this big sheet of something of a matte black, and the rest of it is made out of shiny acrylic. Is it acrylic?
Yep, black acrylic, and it's got a PLA trough light baffle. It's really hard to see in here, but
let's show that.
Yeah, it works basically just like the 8x10.
Oh yeah, okay.
Except it is scaled up and now working and has some extra light baffles because all sorts of geometrical scaling issues. But yeah, so this one worked. This is a piece, and one day you will see the whole camera working. But we're about to tear it apart.
What's the price point on that right now on cameradactyl.com? Is that a $500 back?
More.
More. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, this thing has almost $300 worth of components in it.
Okay.
And it takes over a day to make.
Okay.
But so I said that I would release the 4x5 and the 8x10 already, and those are ready to go. But I don't want to release them because then I would have to make them, and I'm not done making the 20x24, and so I'm just going to hold them all and release them all together.
Yeah.
And if people want to buy 20x24s, I will do that too. But I think a few studios will buy them, and then mostly I will sell small ones, use this like a marketing device,
Yeah.
like Polaroid. Anyway, that's sort of a sneak peek, and we'll see that in some Joe videos coming up.
So this is, I have just realized, I know what you have for the name for this project, but it really should be the Albuquerque box camera.
Albuquerque box.
Yeah, there we go.
Well,
so anyway.
Okay, should we show them the first version of this camera?
I think you're going to have to swap out for a wide-angle lens.
Okay, so, yeah,
Show some prints.
We could show some prints. Well, we'll show the camera body first. It is, all but like 4 pieces of this are getting swapped. Like, I try and think of the best way to build something, but you can only think so hard until you just have to make the thing and find the errors, right? And so we have the first prototype, which has already been revved on the computer and in physical hardware, although it's a stack of parts right now. But let's take a look at kind of what this camera looks like as best as I can set it up behind Joe.
So you can use my headphones for longer.
Just hang on, you can talk.
I'll talk.
And Joe, let Ethan know he needs to put Nick in the corner again because Nick has left and come
Nick
back.
at night.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Does this fit?
It's Nick in the corner. Is he not in the corner?
Okay, so I don't see the bicycle seat. Oh yeah, Ethan can't even hear me because he's taking his headphones off.
He took his headphones off.
But
He's just like usual, he's ignoring you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, there is a folding 20x24.
Okay, so if you guys can remember back to the Black & Decker, so those in the US, the Black & Decker foldable workbench, which I actually have in my shed. They're really good. That is about the size of this object before it unfolds. Ethan and Joe are unfolding. They have just sent up the and Nick, no. They have just set up the front standard.
Well, we set up the rear standard
and,
too. You just can't see it behind the front standard.
Okay.
It's thing.
Yeah.
This Bellows will extend out to 7.5 feet.
6.5.
6.5 feet.
The front standard looks like the back standard on a 4x5 or a 5x7, about that size.
Yeah. So
people are at home.
Right. So I mean, it's hard. I can't even get this in the frame, and we were kind of unset up for it. We're a podcast, so we'll see this on video, but. The front standard was too wobbly, so we have a whole new assembly that's going together today. And then the real trick is this now mashed giant bellows. Joe and I spent a day in like 100-degree heat out on my driveway laying this thing out and trying to assemble it like I would assemble a 4x5 or even an 8x10 bellows. The issue with that is that not everything scales up, right? So, cardboard ribs are a little flimsy, and just like on a 4x5, I lay it on the table and I can reach every part of it and glue it together and fold it up. On a 8x10, it becomes a little harder. On a 20x24, the two of us were like reaching over and walking on the thing, trying to glue it together because it was 12 feet in diameter. So it didn't really work, and it's became kind of a terrible thing.
There is some stuff that you can buy called bookbinding board.
Yeah.
And you need to laser cut that, I think.
Oh, we got one better.
Okay. And each rib it looks to me like you've got inch long ribs. Am I right about that?
Yeah, about approximately. Although, so
Okay, those need to be 3-inch. You just need to scale it all up.
well, that has its own problems too.
Okay.
But so there were some material issues, some geometry issue, but mostly just assembly issue, right? I've built plenty
Yeah.
of bellows in exactly the style, like literally hundreds of them, at least 100, and they all work great. But as this thing got huge, it got really unwieldy.
What doesn't scale up linearly is the stiffness of the material.
Yeah, but also just the size of the damn thing, because it was just, if I was 18 feet tall, this would be no problem to construct. But I'm not 18 feet tall, and it's just, it was just like it became pretty sloppy because we couldn't reach the whole thing at once. So I'm going to put this away, and then we'll look at some of the solutions that we came to. Where I actually built 3 different tools to build a bellows.
Are you
That is
gonna
nice.
move the daylight into?
Maybe we'll. Yeah. Okay. Hold on, Joe. You can narrate here.
Okay. So we brainstormed last week after we got this camera finished and did some test shots. We had some light leaks, not really from the bellows, but from the back film holder area. Just some broken
That's
wood.
how you know. That's how you know you've got a prototype. Light leaks are just part of it.
So we kind of brainstormed at the end of our day last week how to build a better bellows. So what was the problem? And we figured that the stiffeners in each of the ribs of the bellows was simply too flexible.
Yeah.
And if you scale up the material, like let's say you're using cardboard or something, to get it to be as stiff as it is in a 4x5 camera at a 20x24 inch, the thickness of the material ends up being really too thick.
Yeah.
And also the problem with things like mat board and cardboard is if you ever do bend it, it's permanently bent and it's internal and you can't really fix it. So we started going online and looking at other materials. And
did you by any chance look at the big, like the super huge train camera from 1880 or whatever?
We did look at some of the big things. What is this material called?
HIPS, high impact polystyrene.
So what we ended up with is HIPS, high impact polystyrene. This plastic material kind of looks like the cover of a flexible 3-ring binder.
Sure.
Material, a little bit thicker. It laser cuts pretty good, and it is stiffer than cardboard. It is flexible, but it's stiffer than cardboard.
And most importantly, is it cardboard? You get it humid, you put a kink in it, and it's done.
Right.
And this is like, it's not going to lose performance over time in the same way that cardboard would.
Yeah, I think this is a better solution for the bellows. But,
all right, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's good.
I think we're going to have to just carefully turn this.
Okay.
Hopefully, we will not lose the feed here.
Our cables are very protected on this laptop.
Yeah. I got a demo set up.
So the daylight is across the shop. And this is the form that Ethan made to make the bellows making process better. This is a tall, skinny pyramid.
Well, it's not that skinny in the back.
Yeah, made of thin, like 1/4-inch plywood kind of stuff.
Blue iron,
And built on a 2x2-inch stick frame. And he's tipping it over now.
Trying to
get an angle on it. Yeah. And so you lay this conical shaped, pyramid shaped form horizontally, and then you can drape your fabric over it and lay out your ribs, your stiffeners, and build your bellows right onto this form.
Interesting.
Precisely. And that's exactly what Ethan was doing yesterday until what, 1 or 2 in the morning or something like that.
Yeah, I started gluing at 9 a.m. and I finished at 12:30 p.m. or 12:30 a.m.
Yeah, so he's gonna now. He's walking the new Bellows over to in front of the computer here. We will see it. So this is the new Bellows in a compressed state. Collapsed, I should say.
It doesn't yet have its frames on it. It just came out of the press.
What
It's
is
a pretty good indication of stiffness. I
Yeah.
mean, each one of these ribs is flexible, but considerably stiffer than the previous
Yeah.
one.
And I think this thing is going to hold up much better and droop much less into its own light path.
And
Yeah.
also, Ethan used a slightly different design for the corners. So there's more room for the fabric to flex.
Yeah, and it folds, particularly when it's folded up, like it folds to under an inch thick, which is pretty nutty.
So what is the size of the back, the large end? What is the opening?
Roughly 26 inches square.
Okay, so that gives you so that's 26 inches is 2/3 of a meter. Okay.
Yep.
Something along those lines. So the it just for the people at home, these Bellows look a lot better. Now, one of the things that he's talking, that you said that's 8 feet tall, so that means that you're going to get what, 6 feet of expansion, 6 feet of. I have 2 questions.
Mm-hmm.
Using the lens that you've figured out for this, because I don't think you're going to have a system. I think you've got probably one lens you'll
2
use.
lenses.
Okay, 2 lenses. So the main lens, at what point are we 1-to-1? How far of extension are you 1-to-1?
So the lens that is built, 5.5, 6 feet.
Okay.
To show your lens.
We show the lens, yeah.
Well, hang on a second, because I want to talk about the Bellows. I think that you might have overbuilt your Bellows.
No, I did not.
Okay, so here is another.
We overbuilt Rev 1 of the Bellows and the rail.
Okay.
So that camera actually gets about 1.5 feet shorter today when we swap the base rails and the new Bellows.
So I understand, it. Okay, so think about all the people who bought Hummer H2s, a decade ago or so. They bought a vehicle that was very capable to drive off-road, but they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've built a camera to get to 1-to-1.
Oh, we want to go bigger than 1-to-1.
Okay.
So here's the deal. I got a pretty big noggin, right? When I put my shoulder or my chin on Laura's shoulder, like with her head and neck is still shorter than my whole head. And yet, compared to a 20 by 24 inch piece of paper, it's kind of like an environmental portrait at 1-to-1.
2 RC Cola cans.
Yeah. In fact, I'll grab some of the test shots from last week where there was a light leak because of some broken wood and crappy assembly on the first prototype. But we can see very clearly, like, if you want to shoot a portrait in 20 by 24, unless that person is Andre the Giant, you really want to go to like 1 to 1.5.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Bigger than life and twice as ugly is part of the
Well,
thing.
Ethan's inspiration was artists like Ilse Dorfman, who used the Polaroid 20 by 24 inch for making portraits. And of course, because of the demise of the traditional Polaroid media that size, those large cameras, they only built a handful of them. They're not being used. And Ethan's dream is really to resurrect that kind of artistic capability using the color direct positive RA4 process.
Okay. Ethan, look at your text when you can. The Ethan is holding up a 20 by 24 picture of Joe, and the light leak goes straight through the middle of his face.
Yeah. So what had happened was I assembled that back like a week after I cut it, and I broke a piece of the light seal.
Oh, okay. Okay.
However, we found the light seal with our what do you say? We found it with our iPhones in the dark.
Yeah. Flashlight mode in the dark.
It will be fixed with the new components, hopefully. But anyway, this is to give you an idea. This was our first try.
So the black part down here is the bellows sagging, right? Because the image is upside down in the camera.
Yeah.
This is a lightweight,
which we temporarily fixed by using a lot of elastic bands and bulldog clips to pull it out of the way.
Yeah.
So let's bring this up closer to just to show the sharpness.
Oh, okay. So one of the things that I was going, oh God, okay.
And there's some detail.
Right, and this is about 1-to-1 at this extension, and you know, like Joe's head looks like a peanut in this frame.
Right.
You need to go bigger. And so we did. So like
by the time we did this,
plane.
It was a couple hours later, and the sun had already shifted to where it was almost behind.
Yeah.
You can see the light on the back of my ear and stuff like that, but still have the fogging, but really sharp. You can see just a lot of detail in my hair.
Yeah, pull the hair all the way to the front of the camera. These are incredible photographs. Just for
I mean they're incredibly frustrating because of the light leak. Hopefully tonight we will have it dialed in beautifully. Like now, we got the process in.
So these were done on Adorama paper?
Yeah, whatever the cheapy Adorama paper was.
They're multi-grade paper, and we're using the citric acid hydrogen peroxide reversal process with Ethan's self-developing back.
Okay.
And it's a really amazing process.
It was done in the back, yes?
Yeah. If you see my latest video called The Dream Part 1, I show using the 8x10 version of the back, how the processing works. And essentially, you're going to develop, we use Dectol, and then citric acid for 3 or 4 minutes, and about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the citric acid, you can open up the dark slide in the daylight and finish the citric acid step, then do the peroxide bleaching, watch it bleach out totally to white paper, and then redevelop it with the developer again. Of course, you do water rinses between those steps. But it's amazing to watch when you throw the developer on there, to watch that positive image come up in a matter of seconds, like the way tintypes.
Wow. Yeah, I'm excited. Now, Joe, I tried this back when you guys were doing doing the stuff, I don't know, a year ago or so. Right. And I had very little success. I mean, I tried and tried and tried. So I had very little success. So I understand that you guys have reformulated a little bit, or am I just an idiot? I don't know.
Ethan did some really good work on standardizing the process to make it work.
We're a little cleaner now.
Yeah. So this particular paper, he's rating at an ISO of around 3. Mm-hmm. He was using Dectol stock solution mixed 1-to-2, diluted 1-to-2. But other kind of developers, I'm sure, work. I've used them. And then the citric acid is like 30 milligrams per liter of citric acid. So one of the innovations Ethan came up with was a long citric acid step after the developer. So you're going to do a water rinse after your developer, then citric acid for 4 minutes. Get that emulsion really saturated with the citric acid. And then you dump the citric acid and immediately put the 12% peroxide into it. The 12% peroxide is the 40V hair bleach, the liquid hair bleach, not the cream.
Not the
rinse,
cream.
Not the cream, but the liquid.
I did buy
It's
the
about
cream at
12%.
one point.
I remember.
And you basically bleach to completion until
Yeah.
the image is completely just white paper. And it takes continuous agitation. You can do this in white lights, so it's very convenient. And then after it's totally bleached, you dump the peroxide, rinse with water, and do a sodium sulfite rinse just to get any staining, to take care of any potential staining of the image for a couple minutes. And when you do the sodium sulfite step, you'll start to see a faint positive image come up because the sodium sulfite is a little basic pH.
Yeah, I mean, so that is not always the case. I think that's because we had a little developer, or the pH of the water in my backyard was a little goofy.
But anyways, after that sodium sulfite, then rinse it with water, and then dump your developer back into it that you use in the first step, and the positive image immediately comes up in a matter of a few seconds.
Yeah. The next thing to dial back in is color, but the lens is a little too big to use the filters that I've been using. So, and I have to buy some new filter material.
My big thing was that I was never getting the image bleached out. That, I mean, and I was doing 4 and 5 minutes, but you know, I'm ready to try it again. I'm ready to try it in color because I have an RA4 kit. So I am ready for that. So
okay, you need a batch of filters so that you can dial in the color. This is actually something that Joe and I are talking about a bunch. Is that it drives us crazy that like we go through the effort of making videos where we explain all of the variables that go into, you know, a process, and there's like two types of people that are just maddening. One is the one that says, you know, watches the video and then says, okay, what's the filtration? And completely disregards the fact that, like, the batch of paper, the batch of chemistry, the age of the chemistry, the temperature of the room, the amount of UV light all play a part, and there's no just like one filter, right? Just totally disregards it. And then the even more maddening part is the armchair engineer who watched the video, presumably, and then speculates what the one filter is, completely disregarding the other 6 factors that goes into this. Like, it is not, there is no, like, one magic filter pack. Like, when you buy a pack of color paper, it has a base filtration on that batch, right? Like, you could buy Fuji Crystal Archive 20 different times and get 20 different base filtrations, right? And like the age of your chemistry will affect it. And so I don't know, people, it's a process where you got to do a little work, right? You can have like a base starting filtration that you used last time, but like when you set that process up, you gotta shoot 2 or 3 pictures. And
so Ethan and I were talking about this morning in regards to the peroxide reversal process. And when I posted the video last week, I had a few commenters that were asking, like, so what's the concentration of the citric acid? And
it's in the video.
It's in the video.
And this commenter did the work to find me on Instagram and send me the same question that could be answered by watching the video.
I guess the bigger point I wanted to make is there's a phobia of experimentation. People either are afraid to or don't know how to experiment. So in other words, the way Ethan and I refine this process is just starting out with some basic assumptions about paper speed and chemical dilution and processing times, and ran tests and then started changing things one step at a time. Like iteratively making tests and learning from each of those tests, making changes, and then iteratively testing again and refining the process. And I think every photographer or artist who wants to experiment in these kind of processes has to be comfortable with the idea of experimentation is essential to creativity. Play. It's like basically the idea of play. In order to be an artist, you have to be comfortable with play, with just experimenting with things. But there's a certain mentality these days of people who just want a formula, like a cookbook formula. I want this many grams of sugar, flour, this makes it there, and I want to be able to get the results without the process of playing and experimentation. And I think that's a real important thing that people need to be comfortable with is don't be afraid to
Yeah, I mean,
make mistakes.
I think like the internet really allows us to stand on the shoulders of giants, and certainly we do. But like, it is then our responsibility to bloodily scratch and claw and climb and wriggle our way forward millimeter by millimeter.
By the way, I used to be one of those giants. Get the hell off my back.
Okay. Hey, I think we've been on our rant a little bit.
Yeah.
Nick is having some audio problems, so we are going to take a quick break and figure out if we can get Nick's audio on, and we will be back. So I'm going to mute us to the world.
Not that I have any idea what bring us back in.
Okay, great. Because you're on.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was frozen on my screen there for a moment. One of the things that I wanted to, I really wanted to, I'm going to back up to the Bellows thing for a moment. And because if we are, we're looking at options, we're looking at different things that we can possibly do. One of the things that I was thinking about with the Bellows is if you can clamp together sections of Bellows, then you wouldn't necessarily have to haul around the big Bellows all the time unless you were going to do a big project. And I think that may make this a little bit more practical. And it may make it a little bit easier to build each section.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I see where you're going. Joe and I had this argument last week, discussion, and I was having this. No. Well, you're never going to win because I am actually doing the work. So I do what I want.
And and I want to point out that in the Bronx, argument and discussion are synonymous.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
my girlfriend is a good Midwestern girl, and my buddy Bennett and I are, loud, arguing, screaming Jews. And she gets she's like, "Why are you yelling at each other?" We're like, "No, we're not angry. We just scream. This is how we figure things out." Like, could you calm down?
It's an extra dimension of information with the dynamic range of the conversation.
So since you're building it, that's the way.
No. Okay. So
what's wrong with the way that I suggest?
There's nothing wrong in a studio camera. So I actually had this conversation this morning with Rayleigh Criterion over Instagram, and he was suggesting a couple of similar things. So if this were a studio camera, first of all, I'd probably build a sliding box camera for simplicity and ease of use. But even if not, I would have probably at least one central standard and have a square bellows to the center standard and a hard taper on the front, which would make a lot of these things much easier. Like, so on a camera this size, generally you put a bunch of tabs, which we have to glue on later on the bellows, to cinch it back so it doesn't droop into the light path. And then there's like stiffness issues as well with the frame when it's fully extended to 7 feet long. And, those could be corrected in a number of ways, all of which make it bigger and more complicated and heavier. So it becomes more expensive. And the big part about it is less the expense than this isn't a field camera that you go take out in the field, but this is a field camera that I put in the back of my truck and I take somewhere. And so I refuse to make this camera weigh any more than 65 pounds. And so there's things like additional bellow frames, additional standard frames,
That's the name of the camera.
cranks, and thicker rails. Like, there are things that would make this camera better at certain things, but all of those would come at the expense of others, right? And so kind of the crazy part about making such a big camera is, like, when I started, really working hard on this 2.5 months ago, 3 months ago, I built a 4x5. I know the dimensions of this thing. This will be a quick project to bang out. I'll just scale it up. But, if a 4x5 weighs 5 pounds, and this is 125 times the volume, I can't make a 600-pound camera. I can't even really make a 100-pound camera and comfortably move it.
You could if it had wheels and a handlebar.
Right. I mean, I could if I had a 5,000 square foot studio that I was exclusively shooting in.
A Tommy lift.
Right.
Okay. I've been thinking about an alternative bellows that would make sense for this, which would be made of, imagine like a stack of donuts that are inflatable. And you just have a little valving system.
We talked about this.
Absolutely. Bellows.
So Joe was real into inflatable structures in, like, what, the 70s, 80s? And actually, like, an inflatable bellows is a really interesting idea. I think I just succeeded in building a really beautiful bellows of a standard construction with super durable and light materials. So I think I'm going to go down that route rather than trying to figure out how to make pneumatics.
Ethan, you don't have to defend your decisions. It's your camera. We're looking at other options. So one of the other options is if you were to have front standard to back standard, if you were to run a line, you could do it like a tent.
Yeah.
So, if you...
So we will have that line, in fact, to, if the bellows set... So on studio cameras, again, they have that center, or a copy camera, they have that center standard. On field cameras larger than 8x10, and sometimes 8x10, they have tabs at the top. So you run a center line to cinch it back or to hold it up to... And I think, like, doing like a tent rather than a center line, you could have side lines and just have, like, sort of a bunched, you know, but it's
Yeah.
less elegant and more annoying to fold, and as
Well,
it
there's
becomes
also-
easier to fold,
would
it
be
just breaks
lighter.
itself.
There's also the
It would be
slinky
like-
model. The slinky model would be another approach.
Laura
Yes.
walked in here and said, she looked at like all the trouble I've been going through, and she said, you know, those terrible laundry hampers that we had in college
Yeah.
with the big spring and they just popped open, or like
Yeah.
a self-righting tent, right?
Or tunnels.
Why don't you
When
do
I was
that?
a kid, we had tunnels that were
Yeah, the ones that always broke and the coil spring came out and like got in your hand crawling through as a kid. Of course.
No. For me, it was the people who did the slip and slide with the sheet of plastic and left the scissors underneath the slip and slide. I cannot look at a slip and slide to this day.
Oh,
Ugh.
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, you could do the Navy version of the slip and slide, which is during the crossing the equator ceremony. You
Sure.
go from a polylog to a shellback. You fill the slip and slide with food garbage and make people crawl through it.
Oh, lovely.
That's what they do.
Did you do that?
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, so I think there's actually something to, not for this camera, but to the idea of an inflatable bellows or a spring bellows, right? I think
Even
they'll-
an inflatable stiffener just on the top of the bellows
Yeah.
Sure.
that would support the regular bellows below it.
The issue with a lot of these is like the bellows by its nature needs to change dimensions, and getting that to work with an inflatable rib becomes difficult. It makes more sense with one of those big spiral springs, but you know, I just did it the like part of it is I got to sell this thing at some point, and I don't want it to look like
The Cameradactyl laundry hamper.
Yeah.
right, exactly. But you know, I think those are. I would love to see somebody make a big sprung bellows. I think that's a very interesting, good idea.
I like
And
the
then there's
Cameradactyl spring.
another structure. You know, the way that yurts are made of crisscross sticks. That's another.
Yes. Like a
Yeah.
geodesic almost.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another nice telescoping mechanism. Or like the Dr. Seuss, you know, hand that reaches out on the, or
Mhm.
shaving mirrors. You know, those crisscross extension devices. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's you know, we're not even paying attention to the fact that you have this amazing self-developing back. We're just talking about the bellows and solving the bellows issue or giving the different options. I don't know. I'm looking at that back and I'm not seeing how how you could do anything different because that looks that I think is the killer app of the killer app camera.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to being able to test out the 4x5 version of that. So, yeah. So, at what point what more needs to be done? You obviously need to. What's the development that needs to be done at this point that you can
Great
foresee?
question. Really good question. So,
Yeah.
you know, we tried to think about every possible problem, and the issue is like Joe and I shot those pictures last Tuesday, and I was up till I worked through the weekend, and I was up till 1 last night doing this to produce one rev of this camera. So usually the thing that I do is like I just build a camera on the printers, like the homunculus or the Bronco Pan. It went through like 7, 8 things. So like the design time was long, the production time was
That's
quick.
number 3 right there. So,
Yeah. And so you'll usually get to 7 and perfect it. But the issue is if it takes you an entire week of 17-hour days to build a thing, 7 versions are. I was ready to like just lay on the ground and cry yesterday around 10:30. I had been going for 13 hours and I was covered in glue and I had been doing that all week. And so anyway, I put out one rev. I think it should fix all of, like, certainly it will fix that little light leak. Certainly these bellows are not going to be as saggy. There's a couple other like minor issues. Like if we wanted with a little bit of tape, we could have fixed the light leak, and we were able in a very janky way with elastic cord and bulldog clips to get the bellows out of the way. Like we could shoot with that, but it wasn't super nice. This one I think is going to be pretty nice, and I think it will get some minor tweaks and new parts over the course of the next month. But I don't think it's going to get a full rev. I hope it doesn't get a full rev where everything gets rebuilt. I hope like, I wish this geometry was a little different. I'll cut apart. I still have to make black knobs so that it's sellable. But I think when we get off this podcast, Joe and I have to eat brunch and then tear that camera down almost entirely and then build the new camera, which I glued all the parts up, so that's pretty easy now. It's just screwing together. And then we're going to shoot with it tonight. If there's no major problems, then I'm just going to shoot with it for a week and see, it'll just be sort of like ergonomic changes at that point. So I want to get it into a position where if I sold it like that, I would be proud of it by the time I go to the West Coast. And then I will, take it up the West Coast and rent it to people or let people shoot with it and, see what... There's nothing like using a camera for a month to figure out what would make it better, right? Like,
well, are you going to make it up here?
I am. I hope.
When?
I mean, unless I get caught by the fires. I am thinking early September, but I'll let you know when I actually get on the road.
Oh, that's perfect. It should be nice. You'll make it past the fires in September, I think. Yeah. I had a rough time
just
years
run
ago.
The windshield wipers.
Getting to the Bay Area from here, and it wasn't like smoke wasn't unbearable. This was 10, 15 years ago, or more actually. But the problem was that there was nowhere to stay. There were firemen in every single campground, motel room, whatever.
Well, I'll just stay inside my camera.
Exactly.
There we go.
Did you make camper?
Flame retardant. So Ethan, where I am to where you are is 25 or 26 hours, depending on whether I go through Amarillo or Abilene. So I can be there tomorrow at, actually I'll lose a couple of hours, right? Because I'll be crossing into 2 different time zones. So I'll be there by lunch. And so I'll be the subject of taking pictures.
You're volunteering to model? Is that the?
I'm volunteering to model.
We got a date at the club at 6:00 tonight.
I'd have to fly.
Yeah, you can hop on a plane. No, the thing is, like, I wouldn't make you come out here just yet because there's a good chance that it would have some annoying failures or like little things we want to fix. Let's. I really just want to get it. Like, we got the process dialed in. We got the back working. The camera is it's like a thing we've done a million times and built beautiful cameras. Like it just needs a couple more revisions, which normally would take a day or two, and now could just eat months.
Everything is magnified with cameras at this point.
Yeah, scale's a problem. I know. I told you before. My sister ran one of those giant Polaroids for years, and they took it on the road a couple times, and then they just said. It just every single time it was a constant stream of repairs because everything was too big and not quite robust enough. But I want to say that there is a backpacking version of this camera. Eventually, you're going to get to it, and it will mean you sleep in it because the bellows will have to be your tent, and the pack frame will have to be the developing tank.
The good news,
I think you can build that, Nick.
It can be made out of red tent material because you're shooting paper, right?
Right, and you'll have to cook in the lens. That'll be your cook pot.
And your pneumatic inflatable will be your sleeping bag.
We'll call it the Billabong.
Okay.
Okay. So yeah. By the way, if I go through Las Cruces, it's 28 hours.
Las Cruces is
So-
nice. It smells better than Amarillo.
Okay. Okay. So yeah. So it's a date. Oh wait, I want to go through Santa Fe. So screw
No,
that.
you go to Santa Fe from Albuquerque.
No. If I just take a little. Oh, added an hour.
You don't want to go through I-70 on. Yeah, doesn't make sense.
Okay. Anyway, well, we're looking forward to a report.
We will report
when we record our next episode. I think our next episode is going to be for something much smaller.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't even fit any part of this really wholly in the video frame. I was unprepared.
Yeah. So here's what we need to do for the next time is whoever is not operating the camera, take a bunch of phone pictures of the operation of the camera, and we'll do a presentation.
Yeah, or by next week maybe there will be a Joe Van Cleave video on YouTube of the thing. But we will
Probably
see.
take some stills too.
Yeah, definitely drop the stills in. When you're holding up the photo, do the hold up, where it shows the scale of the person.
Mm-hmm.
So we get an idea. Otherwise, it's just a photograph, right? Yeah.
This camera is big enough that you should just include a GoPro mast as part of the camera design. That will just record the process, like an antenna from a car. You just take it up.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Are we ready to wrap things up?
I think we're ready to wrap things up.
I have a couple. Yeah,
Okay.
I do have something.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
I wanted to show Ethan that this is all ready to go for backpacking into Glacier Peak.
Oh, awesome.
So he is holding up a homunculus. Tell us about what you have done to make it ready.
Well, it's got a light meter now and a viewfinder. And I've decided on the 50 millimeter lens and a 6x7 back.
Okay.
And I have a big pile of 120 film. And the other thing is it all goes into this little
oh wow,
padded dry bag, dry bag that fits perfectly into my backpack. And I can just whip the camera out of there and use it. So that's pretty exciting.
Damn, I can't wait to see those pictures. I wish I was going to Glacier Peak this week as well.
Yeah, well, I haven't been out in the mountains in a while, so I'm very excited about it. And I'll be bringing my giant digital camera as well, so I can take pictures of everything. That I'm going to use a lot for panoramics, I think.
Cool.
Okay.
And then, Joe, this is my favorite camera that was built using the same types of materials as your stuff. And I want to say this is version 1, and it's perfect. I did add a couple things, but none of this iteration crap.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay.
Anyway, well, I started with a lot already built there.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody have any shout outs? Anybody want to share anything?
Yeah, hey, thanks to Jeff Perry for all of the secret sauce in building materials.
Okay, sounds good.